decision, though, with respect to that leave, but I think I'll undertake to try and make sure we get all those answers on the website. That brings to a close questions for oral answer today. Honourable members, I have received a letter from the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove seeking to debate the government's decision to delay the initial public offering of up to 49% of Mighty River Power until March-June 2013. I've also received a letter from Grant Robertson seeking to debate the announcement by the Minister for the Environment and the Minister of Local Government that the election for Environment Canterbury will not occur until 2016, with a review occurring in 2014. These are both particular cases of recent occurrence involving ministerial responsibility. I would have been inclined to accept either one of them. However, there can only be one such debate on any one day. The standing orders provide that in these circumstances the Speaker must determine which is the most urgent and important. I have concluded, given the more immediate significance of the government's decision to delay the sale of shares in Mighty River Power, that it should have priority. Legislation has now been introduced to implement the government's decision to extend the Canterbury Regional Council's governance arrangement and special water management decision-making powers. Consideration of this bill will provide an opportunity to debate the timing of the next election for Environment Canterbury. I therefore call on the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove to move that the House take note of a matter of urgent public importance.
Mr. Speaker, I so move. Mr. Speaker, as Jerry Brownlee sort of cackles across the aisle, the people's assets are in jeopardy. We know that to be the case, and we also know that not only are the people's assets in jeopardy because of a government who, based now on John Key's political vanity and John Key's pride, because the whole of the asset sales process has been stuffed up, mismanaged from start to finish. So now what we are down to is not even, I suspect, ideology. We're not even down to ideology. We're down to that government trying to protect and sustain John Key's pride that come hell or high water, he will sell the people's assets, beginning with Mighty River Power. And the interesting point about this process is this. You would have thought that John Key, the $50 million man, and I mean that with no disrespect, the financial whiz kid who probably has more experience in floating companies and initial public offerings than any member of this Parliament and many of New Zealand, would have seen this process for what it was and would have, wrong though he is, because the people don't want their assets sold off, that John Key would have got this process right.
Order. Would members leaving the chamber please do so that the member addressing it is able to do so. The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr. Speaker, a person of John Key's financial experience, a person who purports to maintain the public's confidence, a person who has massive commercial experience, one would have thought, even a junk bomb dealer, Mr. Peters reminds me of, one would have thought that he would have got this process right. We know, of course, that when the legislation was put in this Parliament, he was warned about the significant issues, as was Mr. English, as was the State-Owned Enterprises Minister, as was the government as a whole. They were warned that you could shoot peas through the ownership cap, Mr. Speaker. They were warned not to rush this legislation. They were warned, sir, about the issues that face Maoridom in respect of property ownership and maintenance of rights. They were warned by Tūwhare Toa when they came to the FEC and told the FEC, and they were lawyered up, that they believed that Clause 9, as it was then, which was negotiated by the weekend warriors in the Maori Party, who went around the marae saying that they had done the deal with National, that this would all be all right, that Maori interests and rights would be protected. Then National said, yep, we've done the deal, these interests are protected. Tūwhare Toa, of course, sir, before the FEC, warned the government that their legal advice, that test, that clause did not satisfy their legal advice. They were warned about all this, of course, and they ignored it, and they rammed the SOE legislation through the Parliament at such haste, I think from memory, 2 or 3 months ahead of when it was due, rammed through in such haste that we now sit here with a Waitangi Tribunal recommendation to delay and halt, with pending and probable court action. And of course the Prime Minister's position has changed every week. He was going to do it hell or high water. He has a mandate. He didn't give a damn that 80% in poll after poll after poll, 80% plus of Kiwis said they did not want their assets sold. No, the Prime Minister and the National Party would simply ram this through come hell or high water. He didn't care that the economic conditions on the back of a global economic meltdown meant that this is the worst market environment to be flogging off the family silver. How many IPOs have we had in New Zealand in recent times? Not many, I would wager, in the private sector. But oh no, this government knows more than anyone else. And we know it's the worst time because by their own admission, look at the Air New Zealand share price. Look at now what's happened to Solid Energy. Even Mr English admits they're in no condition to sell. Look at Meridian being bent over the barrel by Rio Tinto. Look at Genesis and Mighty River, and of course Genesis will face the same set of treaty issues that Mighty River now faces. All these signals were out there, and anybody, sir, with half a working brain would realise, one, you don't sell the family silver, but if you're going to do it, sir, if you're going to do it, you do not do it in the worst economic times we have seen in a generation. But I know Bill English and John Key, the economic and financial whiz kid, knows better than all else. We know that Brian Gaynor said that the delay and the mess up in this process will cause gross market uncertainty. We've already had other commentators say that this whole process has been mismanaged from start to finish. So where are we? Not only will the New Zealand people, if this goes ahead, lose their asset, lose their dividend stream, but they're also likely, if Mighty River is eventually put on the block, it will be sold off in a fire sale. There is no way that Bill English or Jerry Brownlee or any of the financial geniuses over there can say that they are going to get $5 to $7 billion for these assets now. No way in hell that they can make that claim. The second point is, of course, the dishonesty of the last budget, because we now know that the budget projections are in jeopardy, because the other financial whiz kid, the sort of tricky trickster Bill English, who booked the sale from assets which have not been sold, now delayed, some halted, maybe some, I hope, were all never sold. Those proceeds from the sale were booked in the budget. Of course, he didn't book the revenue loss and the dividend stream loss that would flow from that sale once it occurred. That, as Mr Twyford said, is not just dishonest, that is gross dishonesty. So we know that this has been mismanaged. I say the one benefit of the tribunal action and the halt is that every day that the New Zealand people maintain these assets within public ownership is a good day for our communities, is a day when they can still receive dividends, which will be put into hospitals, which will be put into schools, without the sale of those assets. Because, of course, the other great lie and untruth of this government is that they said first it was about debt. Then it wasn't about debt, of course. Then it wasn't about debt. It was about buying other assets. And then when you unpack that, of course, it was about selling revenue-generating assets and buying non-revenue generating assets like schools and roads, which last time I checked, when you build a school, unless it's a charter school or a private school that this mob pour dough into, your local primary or secondary or intermediate school does not make a profit or a return to the taxpayer, and nor should it. So the economic equation and proposition that these geniuses put to the public, because it sounds good, doesn't it, as a spin line, we're going to sell some assets and we're going to buy other assets, they say. Now, to the great unwashed, that might sound like a good line, until you unpack it and realise that when selling revenue-generating assets and buying non-revenue-generating assets, I wager, colleagues, that even Jerry Brownlee, with all his fingers and toes, could work out and calculate that at some point the money runs out. It's gone. It's over. Because you're buying a series of non-revenue generating assets. And I say, Mr. Brownlee sort of waxes on, of course. I say this, that the people will now get an opportunity to express their will, and they will do that through the asset sales referendum, which I believe will now occur with a high degree of certainty. And in that referendum, I would wager, and I'm happy to take a bet, maybe for a McDee's voucher or something like that with Mr. Brownlee, I think that it will be 80%, maybe even more, of New Zealanders that will vote to retain their assets. And then, sir, we're going to have an interesting series of debates leading up to the 2 years odd to the next election. Because there will be a problem at that point with the government arguing in respect of mandate. Because if there is a referendum, and there will be, and if the response is overwhelmingly in opposition to the government's position, and I believe it will be, then no mandate will exist for the government to proceed. So that's the other leg of the stool which is going to be cut out from under them. So I thank those in other places that have ankle-tapped this process. I thank them for this, because it gives the ordinary citizenry in our community the opportunity to get those signatures, to get those 310,000 signatures, to force this mob over here, sir, to have a referendum, and then the people will have their say. Because in mismanaging the blunder over water, this government has opened the Pandora's box in relation to property issues of state-owned assets because of their mismanagement. These issues will be examined in detail now as each and every one of those assets moves closer to the sale door. And because they've stuffed it up, sir, I predict in the next 2 years we're going to hear a lot about reallocating priorities. We're going to hear a lot about budget projections which have somehow moved, and they're already prepping the ground. Of course, because they keep talking about, well, if it doesn't go ahead, what's going to happen? Oh, we're going to have to get into more debt. Well, I say to the government, if they hadn't chosen to put in place a tax cut, which gives those at the top the most, and our communities at the bottom nothing, and as a result we're borrowing $300 million a week, then I suspect New Zealand might be in a different situation in respect of debt, regardless, I would argue, of the global financial meltdown. So here are some questions for Mr. English. What is going to be the position on Mighty River Power? Because we know there's now talk of, the tribunal of course talked about Shares Plus. The Prime Minister of course immediately rubbished that, rubbished the hui, has corralled all his members, won't allow his members to go because they just don't want to know. It's sort of hear no evil, see no evil, pull the blankets up at midnight and hope the goblins go away. Hope the nightmare is over. And when the blankets come down, the sun will come up and all will be well. Well, sorry, the best thing this government could do is get off its backside, go to the hui, listen to the communities, and maybe come back with some proposals. Because they're all over the place. Firstly, they rubbish Shares Plus. Then they say they're going to go out and consult on Shares Plus. No one really knows what Shares Plus means. But first they're against it, then they rubbish it, then they say they're going to go out and consult on it, then they say they won't participate in a national hui, which I would have thought is a pretty efficient way to deal with a large body of our citizenry, called the Maori people. But I know they won't go. And I say to the Maori members over there, oh, Labor will be represented, don't worry about that, Shane. Labor will be represented. And I say that what the Maori members should do in the National Party is say to their chief, we're off, we're going, we are not going to be stood down, we are going to engage in the democratic process, and we're going to go, ziplock our mouths and listen to the people at that hui. Not be sort of trod on by the tribal chiefs in the National Party. And I do say in passing, it's extremely interesting that the Maori Party, who purport to represent all things Maori, all people Maori, all culture Maori, ain't going to be within cooey of that hui. No disrespect. They're not even going to be anywhere near it. And I say this, I say this, the challenge for the Maori Party is the same as the National Party. They pretend they're not in government, the Maori Party. They are ministers of the Crown. They have the warrant, they have the $250,000 salary, they have the LTDs, they crow and crow that they represent Maori, except they sold Maori out over Clause 9 in the SOE's legislation. They said they'd sorted it out in terms of property rights issues. They represent Maori, they represent them so well that they boycott the national hui that the Waitangi Tribunal recommended they go to. The question is why? Have they fallen into line with the National Party, sort of led by the nose? I'd say that's a fair chance. Yep. Well, they should show some guts, Mr Speaker. They should show some guts, and they should actually attend that hui and listen to their people. So I say to Mr English, could he use the debate today to explain to us how he's going to unbundle such a mess which has occurred? Because he's had, nearly 4 years to put this policy in place, he and his government, and at every turn, from the passage to the legislation, to the submitters being truncated, to the water rights issue, having been warned of that, no guarantee in the legislation that mum and dad Kiwi will be in the queue, to a loyalty scheme that they said they didn't need because Kiwis were going to keep these shares infinitum into the future, and then they come out with an expensive loyalty scheme where those who can't afford to buy the $1,000 to $2,000 blocks of shares will pay for all the people who can. But they didn't need it, of course, because people believe in this so much. What a fiasco, what a stuff-up. And I just asked Mr English, aided and abetted by his colleagues, that he might want to spend the next 15 minutes explaining how he's going to unbundle this, why we're preserving the Prime Minister's pride, and whether he'll actually pull the pin, listen to the people, and keep the people's assets in Crown ownership.
I call the Honourable Minister